Well, good morning. I'm Jeff Coleman.
And I'm Deborah Pinkerton. Welcome to a special edition of Morning Light, Election 2024 coverage. Well, the people have spoken. Donald Trump was elected the 47th president of the United States.
And it all came down to the Keystone State of Pennsylvania. Trump also won the popular vote by more than 5 million. Now, Mr. Trump is calling on Americans to put aside division and unite.
Our land to join me in this noble and righteous endeavor. That's what it is. It's time to put the divisions of the past 4 years behind us. It's time to unite. And we're going to try. We have to try. And it's going to happen. Success will bring us together. I've seen that.
And here's a preview of what's coming up later in the show. This is not the first presidential election to face turmoil. We can look at 2016, but go back even further in history. Well, a political analyst will share some of the nation's most contentious elections. Plus, our Morning Light medical contributor, Dr. David White, will share ways we can overcome post-election anxiety.
But it is Wednesday, November 6th, and yes, the people have spoken in a decisive way, with former President Donald Trump on track to be the 47th President of the United States. The now President-elect clinched the Electoral College and the popular vote just after his 2 a.m. speech this morning in Palm Beach. Mr. Trump called for unity.
And this morning, pro-life voters around the country are celebrating the defeat of a Florida measure putting Roe v. Wade back into state law. And across Pennsylvania, pro-life candidates like Congressman Scott Perry in central Pennsylvania appears to be surviving coordinated attacks by national pro-choice groups. So what does it mean for the pro-life movement around the country?
And really for other movements, like issues from school choice to women's sports, all of these issues were on the menu in the past 24 hours. So what will Democrats do next? We'll take these big questions to the Morning Light panel this morning. Good morning, panel. What a delight to have these all-stars back here. Cynthia, Megan, David, and John Wetzel. This has been exciting is really an understatement, but for so many people, it's a mixture of anxiety, it's a mixture of fear, it's a mixture of joy, elation, and surprise this morning. We have, from the very beginning of this program, been saying some version of God is in control no matter what the outcome. And November, the day after the election, the 6th, is going to be as important as Election Day, that our hearts have to kind of stay right here. Cynthia, your family is not all one party or another party. How was your family this morning processing the events of the last 24 hours?
I would say pretty divided. I spoke to my brother this morning and spoke to another family member as well. And I just said, we need to take a breath. We are family, and that's what we do, and that's how we move on. And you know, trying to manage some of the anger, because a lot of people are pretty mad this morning. So even within my family. Trying to love and find some peace in all of it. And I'll be honest, one of the things that my brother spoke of today was, and he lives in St. Croix, so he's a bit of a distance away. Yeah. And he said, I get what happened within the country. Yeah. And he said, but the rhetoric still stings on both sides. Yeah, I think that feeling's pretty.
This is an election, Pastor, where there are probably a lot of regrets, things that people that left their keyboards and left their mouths, or things that people said driving by someone's car. Do you just put it back in the bottle? What do you do now?
Yeah, I think it's challenging to put things back in the bottle. Obviously, it's out, right? And so I think what we need to do is take a step back and take a breath. I think the first thing we can do as a nation is pray. I think that we need to be.
What do you pray for?
What do I pray for? Boy, I pray for unity and peace. I pray for people who could look at each other and look at each other with eyes and a heart of love, and not condemnation or criticism. I'm hoping for that. Even though we disagree, we're going to disagree. We always have. Yeah. The 12 disciples disagreed, and they were walking with Jesus, right? They disagreed. Can you put me in charge? Can you put me in your seat beside you? I mean, they were asking questions, the same kind of things that we look at today. Can we get past it? Absolutely.
Yeah.
But it's going to take some real work on our behalf.
What are you doing practically, Megan, as you're thinking about your Thanksgiving table? And maybe you're an unusual family that everybody agrees on everything, but I'm kind of thinking maybe not.
No.
So what's a practical thing you might do in the next 24, 48 hours? Say, I'm going to do this thing that will help stitch our family together for my piece of this idea of what President Trump called for unity.
Sure. In terms of my family, you need to be the bigger person and extend the olive branch. And, my husband and I lead our family, and we do agree, politically and philosophically. And so we need to lead our family. And I think that not only in your own family, but across the country, each of the sides think of the other as monsters in many instances. And I think people need to just have conversations and realize, I'm not the monster you might think I am, and you're not the monster that I think you are. I think that there really needs to come down to basic good conversations, hear each other out, listen to your issues, don't make it personal, really talk about the issues. Because at the end of the day, President Trump was reelected to govern, and he's going to govern all of America.
There's an
not
actual
just
job
half.
here.
Absolutely,
This
not
isn't
just half.
You're a coach. You've been on the losing side, the winning side. You're training young men how to respond when they are defeated narrowly. And this was, no matter how you look at it, a place where there's a line going through lots of communities and homes. The coach to the country, to the state.
Yeah.
What do you say?
Well, first of all, get out of the extremes, right? If you're extremely happy and think your life is immediately better today, or you're extremely distraught and think that your life is immediately in jeopardy, stop, move into the middle. And again, a framing you need, or a framing that may be good for you and we all need, is a godly framing. And I think, I appreciate setting a tone of unity. But looking through the transcript, I think it took 23 minutes to get to God. And then I think God was mentioned 3 times, and as a Trinitarian,
Right.
3 is good, but realistically, there was a whole lot of people thanked first. So let's be really clear about what we said yesterday and what we said today. What the world needs is the worldview of in our belief system of the Christian belief of loving our neighbors and not looking through a political lens to interpret the world. And so I'm probably uncomfortable with these conversations, because I refuse to have a conversation unless that conversation is steeped in an objective reality we all know that exists. And so if your filter is some political party, then you and I can't have a conversation, because that's not the objective reality that we're all living in.
So let's stay with that objective reality. Your congregation, Sunday morning, and congregations all over the country. You can walk into a church in many cases, look at the bumper stickers in the parking lot and say, okay, this is a church for me, if you're politically one way or the other. Martin Luther King talked about Sunday morning being the most divided hour in America. How does the church then respond? Everybody's talking about God this morning. There was a God mention. Kamala Harris will probably mention God this morning. In God we trusted on the coins.
Right.
How does the church and Christians, people who say, we wear the same badge, we worship at different churches, how do they
I think
come
Dr.
together?
King was right, I don't think we've moved off of that far enough yet. Unfortunately, we have churches who are focusing on the extremes, far to one side, far to the other, and said we're going to plant our flag in that place. I think the hardest place for us to be, whether it's in our families, in our communities, and especially in our churches, is to say, look, the mushy middle is the place we're called to. We're called to be people who live in that middle, so that we can bring everybody into the picture.
Somebody, by hearing this, may say, but Dave, you're just,
right.
that's weak,
Sure.
or that's woke.
I think it's harder.
Yeah.
I think it's actually harder to be in the middle.
What do
I think
you
it's
mean by middle?
I think it's easier to say I'm ultra-conservative or ultra-liberal. I'm going to be on this extreme because, boy, I don't have any questions over there. It's either black or it's white. When you're in the middle, I have to love and accept, even when it's hard for me to do that. And sometimes...
And you have to think.
Yes.
You have to think, and you have to interpret it through your own belief system.
to.
And that's harder than saying,
is.
oh, I have this letter behind my name, and that means I have this position.
Right. Exactly right. I think it's a harder place to be, and it calls us as believers to call on the strength of Jesus, who died for everybody, not just for me and my political point of view.
Cynthia, do you find it hard in a political season, particularly, to think of yourself as a Christian first, just honest, as opposed to being a Republican or a Democrat or whatever your party affiliate? Is it sometimes the ranking difficult?
Sure. mean, when I wake up in the morning, I try the first thing I do is open my Bible. Lately, my phone is binging. So I'm like, okay, so then I turn that way. And then the TV goes on. And then, so my Christian beliefs and what I should be learning about myself and how it's affected by what the Bible says can be thrown. What does that say about me? It says I'm still really new in a walk. Aren't we all? Like my path needs to be better every single day.
Needs to be refreshed every morning.
It does. And I think that's the other thing that we're all referring to. I'm hoping what I'm hearing from both candidates right now will move forward as positive. I mean, from the coaching perspective, I say it's really so much, of course it's so much harder to lose.
Swim coach, football coach, a lot of coaches.
Donald Trump is standing out there right now going, I won. Terrific. I mean, you did. Kamala Harris, there's grace there. Yeah. And what can we learn from that? What do we want everybody to learn from what happened in the last 24 hours, in the last 2 years?
I want you to take the last minute or so here and just wrap up with advice to the person who we have not heard from yet, Vice President Kamala Harris. They're drafting the speech. Maybe somebody watching from their team this morning. What do you say? What do you need to say to get you and others to feel that you helped stitch the country back together after this election?
Sure. I have a unique perspective on this, Jeff, because I lost a statewide election last year. Granted, it wasn't President of the United States, but I lost, and it was heartbreaking. And I know how hard it is for her. I can only imagine at her level, it's that much harder, but she needs to do the right thing. She was in a race to lead America, all of America. And so she needs to, I think, set the right tone, extend an olive branch to President Trump and say, I wish you well. I love America too. Let's everybody get united. And face it, we all woke up today, we're still neighbors in one America, and we need to love our neighbors.
I'm going to let that be the final word. We are all still neighbors. Thank you, Megan. Thank you, panel, very much. Well, thanks to our extraordinary panel for joining us today. We're going to have another panel just a little later in the show, coming up next on Morning Light. The history of contested presidential elections, 2000, 2020, and now 2024. But you can go even further back into history. A political analyst will break it all down for us after the break.
Good evening. Just moments ago, I spoke with George W. Bush and congratulated him on becoming the 43rd President of the United States. And I promised him that I wouldn't call him back this time. I offered to meet with him as soon as possible so that we can start to heal the divisions of the campaign and the contest through which we've just passed. Almost a century and a half ago, Senator Stephen Douglas told Abraham Lincoln, who had just defeated him for the presidency, "Partisan feeling must yield to patriotism." I'm with you, Mr. President, and God bless you. Well, in that same spirit, I say to President-elect Bush that what remains of partisan rancor must now be put aside, and may God bless his stewardship of this country.
The 2024 presidential election is not the first contentious race. Joining us is political analyst Dr. Miles Hodges to explain. Thank you for being with us.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
So many say that this year's election may go down in the history books, but that's really not the case.
Well, of course it will be found in history, but there's nothing terribly exceptional about how this has unfolded. If you look at the longer run of things, this was actually a rather typical election. There have been some really tough ones. This was not one of them. I think of Teddy Roosevelt, who decided after having stepped out of politics, decided he wanted to jump back in. And his best friend, William Howard Taft, didn't want to step aside, so he set up an independent party, the Bull Moose Party. And the next thing we know, it split the Republicans terribly. It was devastating. And it brought in Woodrow Wilson, a Democrat who had otherwise no chance of ever. I mean, I can go down the list. Back in 1824, Andrew Jackson had the most votes, but he didn't have enough to clinch the Electoral College because there were 4 people running, and there was only one party at that time, the Democratic Republican Party. So they were all split. And so they had to, under the 12th Amendment, go into the House of Representatives to have a decision made there. And there, each state is only entitled to 1 vote. This is not the same thing as the Electoral College. And only the top 3 of the 4. And that left out Henry Clay. And Jackson was expecting, since he had the largest number, not the majority, to be the one that would be elected, but a little deal was worked in which Clay, through his vote to, come on, where's my 83-year-old mind? Adams, John Quincy Adams, the son.
Wow.
And you can imagine the fury, of Jackson. And Jackson really opposed everything for the next 4 years that came out of the White House. And it was, but so, I mean, I could go to the list. There's so many.
Right.
This is pretty calm from my point of view.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So there's a winner, there's a loser. So how does the nation move forward? How has it moved forward in the past?
Well, I can tell you this, by simply pure American instinct. It's really very good. One of the things that kind of disappointed me was the fact that in the midst of all of this wrangling, so there were some wonderful things going on in North Carolina and East Tennessee. And I was watching America in action, responding to the tragedies there that had little or nothing to do with national politics. This is the America that carries on. This is the America that, regardless of what goes on in Washington, this is the America that still drives America. And it will continue to do so, and quite nicely as far as I'm concerned. We'll get on to the next step because we were founded on an endorsement by God himself, who wanted to see America succeed as a city on a hill, a light to the nations. And that's sort of in our instinct to be a people that responds as Jesus would have us in service to others. That has nothing to do with Washington programs.
Right.
That's the heart and the spirit of America.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for this insight. We certainly appreciate it.
Thank you.
And coming up next on Morning Light, when a president comes to town, controversy and protests follow. When William Howard Taft visited Pennsylvania's capital city, he delivered both. We will tell you what the 27th president did to anger many area pastors. In 2024, the president, vice president, and their challengers visited the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania dozens of times. It's why we're called the Keystone State.
But when President William Howard Taft came to Harrisburg on a Sunday afternoon in 1911, his speech to a labor group was viewed through the lens of the biblical principle of rest or Sabbath. Today, a speech on Sunday no big deal. Back then, it was the definition of controversy. In May of 1911, President William Howard Taft was coming to Harrisburg for a speech to the Brotherhood of Railroad Trainmen. He'd be traveling by train from New York, be greeted by tens of thousands of cheering Pennsylvanians, see old friends and political allies, and have dinner at the governor's mansion. Local historian Don Goss says the trip was strategically important.
There was an importance for railroads at the time. Railroads, of course, were big politically, they were big economically, and here they had a chance to come and speak to the delegates of the Brotherhood of Railroad Trainmen. And there was 800 that were meeting here in Harrisburg for a few days, plus their wives. And so it represented nearly 2,000 people, and who represented, at least in 1900, there was 1 million railroad employees in the country and 10,000 related jobs to the railroad industry. So in 1911, I'm sure there was a lot more.
And he is up against a re-election campaign that sounds like he is dreading.
He is sweating because Roosevelt was kind of threatening to run, and so he needed.
This is his friend, his mentor, right?
This was the guy. Yeah, this was the guy who basically introduced him to the presidency. In fact, there was a cartoon that I saw that Theodore Roosevelt actually hoisted Taft to his shoulders to carry him through to the presidency, and now he's a threat to that presidency.
Just before the trip to Harrisburg, it was announced his beloved First Lady, Nellie Taft, a month before their silver wedding anniversary, had a nervous breakdown. He'd be making the trip without her. But something else would overshadow the trip, and this one made news around the world.
In the early 1900s, on a Sunday morning, especially here in Harrisburg and the surrounding area, the only thing you could hear was church bells. So that was it. Because of Pennsylvania law, it protected the day of rest and also a day of leisure on a Sunday. There was nothing going on. There was no public transportation locally. There was no stores open. There was no industry open. There was no theaters that were open, not even any concerts that were open. So his coming on a Sunday and coming to the Casino Theater.
One pastor said Taft's visit on the Sabbath was like a circus. Others said it was a desecration. Another said it was a gross violation of the fourth commandment, shattering the peace of Sunday.
I guess it was it ruffled so many feathers, and I'll give him a lot of credit for that, was that on the very, very next day, the Methodist ministers met on a Monday, and they basically formed a censure of both the president, I guess it was the mayor, the ex-mayor, and any minister had something to do with the presidential visit. So it was a big deal that this day was no longer being sanctified for its intended purpose, but rather for a presidential visit.
One even suggested none of the martyred presidents, Lincoln, Garfield, or McKinley, would have desecrated the Sabbath this way. The controversy meant a much quieter presidential visit.
So this is what would have pulled up here would be 11 cars that came to pick up the president. He would come out directly out the door and boarded the car with all the dignitaries. Of course, he was greeted by the mayor and greeted by the governor as well, and probably a scaled down version of security that was with the motorcade. And from what I understand, there was one bugler sound off a bugle sound, I guess, to alert everybody in the area that the president had arrived.
The question of Sabbath rest would eventually be settled. While most Americans see rest as important, at last check, fewer than 50% give the day any spiritual significance. President Taft would go on to lose the election, but return to Harrisburg one day as the 10th Chief Justice of the Supreme Court.
Wow. Jeff, it's really hard to imagine that a speech or any kind of event that takes place on a Sunday would really cause such a stir.
You have to think, as Don said, the whole economy, the whole culture was built on your 6 days thou shalt labor, and then you'll rest on the seventh day. And what's been interesting, I think, about this presidential campaign is it has never stopped. From 2016 till today, we have never had a break, a breather to reflect on where we have been, and I think that's probably not a good thing. We do.
I think we need that break.
Yeah.
Well, stay with us. We will be back right after the break. Well, we have had a really good discussion about the election and the aftermath, and we will continue the conversation in the next half hour. Coming up, we will talk to our Morning Light medical contributor
about the aftermath of the election. Plus, radio talk show host Gary Sutton will be here to share his take on the election.
And stay with us. A special edition of Morning Light continues right after the break. Welcome back to this special post-election half hour of Morning Light. Election day has come and gone.
Can you believe it? Well, the biggest headline is the biggest comeback in American political history. The 45th president, Donald Trump, will become the 47th president of the United States. We're going to join the Morning Light panel to discuss what happens next. And let me begin by saying, I know everyone's been looking at this group and saying, but is this the same group as before? No, we've got a few new faces here. We've got David Smith and Daniel Malinich, in addition, of course, to Cynthia and John Wetzel. Thank you all for bringing perspective. I'm going to start with you because your generation seems to be connected 24 hours a day to messaging. You were plugged in from beginning to end of this election. Do you think you need to unplug a little bit? Because right now, we know what the results are. We know who will be president in January. But many people can't look away, it seems, and they're probably going to stay this way until Christmas or beyond. What's your thought on this?
Yeah, I think to an extent, us looking at results, we need to pull out. But for the people in our communities that we love, that we care for, that this election didn't go how they want to, we need to stay tapped into them. We need to show it's going to be okay. We need to have compassion for people and say, for these 2 months, we still have the current presidency. Things are going to be okay. Don't stress about things and just bring that peace and show what that Christ in your life can represent. And that's how we need to still be tapped in while still in our own health, not looking at numbers because the elections have been called, but for those people that are anxious, stressing, worrying about what is this country going to look like, we need to be still fully poured into them.
The idea of, but can't we gloat a little bit? Can't we do an end zone dance here? Isn't there a place for some excitement and euphoria? After all, I'm giving a voice to the side of the winner. Why can't we just stay there for a little bit?
Because humility is what should always come first. When we take anything in pride, that's when we ultimately are losing. Even if whoever wins in the election, when we take a stance of pridefulness, that's when we lose.
Coach Lyons?
Well, I was going to say humility. I was going to say the same thing. You know, you become a better person by winning when you're humble. And and truly, that's the way we're going to continue to move forward and hope to unify the country. I mean, not by starting to goad and picking on the people and saying, see, you know, good thing you voted, that kind of stuff. There's a lot of rhetoric that's still out there. You become a better person on either side when you lose being humble.
Absolutely. Secretary,
you win being humble.
Coach Wetzel, take me to the locker room after a football game where your side, your team has won. How much euphoria do you allow? And at what point do you say, hey guys, remember they're hurting tonight?
Maybe football's not the best example. And maybe I'm not the best analog for that.
Well, sure,
but no,
you
you always,
honest.
no, honestly, you win with class 100% of the time. You go shake their hand and you look them in the eye and you tell them good luck, you appreciate the fight. And I'll tell you, this generation though, I think us old people need to understand a couple things. For us, the devices are often a barrier. Mm-hmm. They're connected through these devices. Mm-hmm. But you talk about the locker room. Coach Miller, our head coach, does not allow cell phones in the locker room. So there's a big cooler next to it. And I'll tell you, when you remove that, the connection and the enhanced understanding of kind of how to manage relationships is really there. But they don't have a lot of the, like, I don't see this generation as, you know, shame on you as we were. I think they're more sensitive to the feelings of their other students. And so I think that's more an influence. And when you see it, it's an influence of the parent.
Pastor David, you're nodding. Do you agree? Did you play sports?
I did.
What'd you play?
Basketball, football, ran track. That was
were you any good?
Many moons ago. Now I'm a sumo wrestler. Which is, always an athlete, but just really, really sad.
So speak to fellow winning sumo wrestlers.
Well, I think what's interesting is that when Paul writes to the Ephesians in Ephesians 4, the whole Jew-Gentile debate is much stronger than Republican-Democrat. And he is talking about a church of spirit-filled believers, and he says, be diligent to preserve the unity that exists among you. He says the unity's already there. You've got to be diligent to preserve it. In other words, you've got to work to maintain it. So as a team one, if you're on the red team, you don't gloat, as has been stated. You don't exercise pride. You can't say, God, this is all for your glory. And then when you win, that you're somehow going to rub it in the other person's face. So I think, as has been stated again, it's really important to have dialogue, especially if we're believers. We're not always going to get along with the way the world thinks about this situation. But in terms of those believers that are democratic, we've got to sit down and say, hey, let's really sit down and wrestle through the issues. If it's going to be about Christ's glory, John 17, he wants us to be unified, and we've got to work to do that.
So let me talk to you, because you're very practical. Every time I have you in this conversation, you're very practical. Practically, you've been following somebody online who has not been kind to you during this process and engages you, thinks you're too far this way, too far that way. And now, but you're still connected on social media, and you know you might run into them in real life. So what does it look like to say engaged? Do you say, hey, come over for Thanksgiving? Or is it a call? Is it a text? What is it?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, politics are just the American people seeing the same problem, but just having different solutions to how that problem could be fixed. And so at the end of the day, we have to put aside that second piece and first go, okay, there is a problem. And so I think those that I might have had a buffer with or a disconnect with, we can still have that same relationship where we buffer, but healthily. We talk about, well, now that, okay, this is a Republican Senate and Trump is president, we don't know where the House sits right now. At our state levels, what does that look like? Let's take a look at our closer issues now that the federal level is kind of settled.
So what does this look like, Cynthia, in small communities? You live in a small community. How many people live in your hometown?
Oh, Lord. I don't even know.
5,000?
Well, I was going to say 40. I was going to say probably 5 or 6.
And you're going to run into people over the next few days that voted the opposite way. What's your practical step then? A little different generation, but what's your practical step then to bring people together?
I was just going to say, truly, as easy as this sort of sounds, it's kindness. I mean, it really is. I was saying a little earlier, as I was driving here today, I saw a woman that, you know, may have been in her 80s, and she had a Trump hat on. And I blew the horn and waved my hands. And down the street, there was a woman, a little older, and she had a Kamala shirt on. So I blew the horn and I waved.
Right.
I mean, like, we just have to be kind. We have to be kind, we have to be humble, and we have to continue our lives as we normally would. If I'm in the grocery store and I have 6 items and someone is standing behind me that has 1, they're going to go in front of me. Whether it was 6 months ago or whether it's today. I mean, as simple as that sounds, I'm going to walk through the halls at the high school and say, hey, you look great today. Well, we're not going to use that language, are we? On the pool deck, I'm going to say, we're going to act like human beings, not fools.
So, Coach, we're waiting for the concession speech from Vice President Harris. We've given advice throughout this show to how we think concessions should be applied. But there's also the concession that happens with neighbors. And some people have kept up their yard signs, the same political signs from 2016 and the next cycle and the next cycle. In the old days, you take them down after 24 hours, sign of respect, and we can go back to normal. Anything practical that you'd like to add as we close this down?
Yeah, I think we lost the art of listening. And when I say the art of listening, I mean, we hear stuff, but I mean, suspending our own judgments, suspending our own stuff, not trying to read the context of a text or an emoji, which I'm pretty good at, quite frankly. But I think we've lost the art of just when you say something, I just accept it as true and I respond how I think. And I think we need a lot of that. And I think as soon as that happens, all the stuff that people are worried about, it gets less worry. Like the impact on your life starts at its local government up. Yeah. So the actual impact on your day-to-day life is so much more local, and how your relationships are, and whether you walk into the store and you're happy to see people or you're trying to avoid people, that is what counts. And when that stuff works, you talk about coaching, take care of the little stuff, and the big stuff takes care of itself.
30 seconds. There is an idea, we were hearing all this and everybody says, okay, I get that, sounds good, I love what they're saying, but I can't do this. This is impossible. The prayer, communing, talking with God, you've talked about this a lot. What does that look like when it comes to engaging somebody? Is it you're seeing somebody come down the road, do you say a little prayer, say, Lord, help me to not communicate on my face what I really think in my heart? Does it matter that you say one thing with your face, but your heart is dark? You know,
it absolutely matters. And I think, as has been stated, this is impossible for a man in his natural flesh. Jesus understands that. John 15, verse 5, apart from me, you can do nothing. Apart from being tapped into the vine, being tapped into the Spirit, we can't do anything. But on the other side, with the Spirit, we can do all things. And Jeff, I think we've got, especially as leaders in our community, we're all somebodies, right? In our small little world, we've got to set the example. Jesus set the example as he reaches out to the unlovable and shows them what true love is. That's what we have to do.
Final word. Thank you all, and thank you all for being here on this exciting and important and thoughtful day after the election. Well, coming up on Morning Light, the election might be over, but your stress level might still be a little high. Deborah will sit down with our Morning Light medical contributor, Dr. David White, for a few tips on how to calm your anxiety.
I want to say that one of the great features of America is that we have political contests, that they are very hard fought, as this one is hard fought, and once the decision is made, we unite behind the man who is elected. I want all of you to know, I want Senator Kennedy to know, and I want all of you to know that certainly if this trend does continue and he does become our next president, that he will have my wholehearted support and your support.
Election Day 2024 is gone, but for many, the outcome of the election is not. Joining us is Morning Light medical contributor, Dr. David White. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
So the election is over, but some may be struggling with the outcome. How do we move past this?
Well, what we knew for sure is that some were going to be awakening this morning with a sense of anxiety, perhaps deep disappointment. And I want to acknowledge that anxiety is common to us all. I think that's very important. And so we can all relate to this discussion. I think when examining anxiety in this situation, there are three things to look at. What is anxiety? How does that relate to the election? And thirdly, what do we do? Well, anxiety is really a fearful projection of what we think might happen based on what we know today. That fearful projection is not typically delusional. It's related to our real experience of a broken and fallen world where people are hurt. There's sickness, there's illness, there's death. And so we project all these scenarios based on what we know to be true. Even so, we're invited somehow by Jesus to be anxious for nothing. So how do we do that? Well, as it relates to this election, I think it is in acknowledging that God was sovereign over this election. We know from the Bible that there is no authority except that given by God. And so we can rest in that. I have to admit there's a lot of mystery in that for me. If you look back through history, a lot of terrible leaders, evil that has reigned. And how does that fit into God's sovereign purposes? I don't know for sure, but I know He is trustworthy, and I know He is good, and I know He is working out a plan. Thirdly, what do I do? Well, we are invited to do what we have always been called to do, and that is to love God with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength. Beyond that, we are called to love our neighbor as ourselves. That is our response, and allowing our love to connect with other people. And that, I think, because anxiety is a shared experience, loving one another is the way around that.
Yeah, absolutely. Loving your neighbors, loving your friends. I know when we're walking, my husband and I are walking our dog in the evening, we have signs for both candidates, but we still say, hi, how are you doing? You know, you have to respect your neighbors. You have to respect your friends.
Right, and what you're demonstrating there is that the power of our words. With our words, we can cut, we can destroy, and with those words, we can heal. As a physician, healing begins with my words more than anything else, more than any medication, touch, or procedure. It's my words. And so we know from Scripture that gracious words are like a honeycomb, sweetness to the soul and healing to the body. So I think we enter this next season with a commitment to gracious words, to kind words.
That is so absolutely right, because I know that when I go to the doctor and when the doctor's like, it's okay, you're going to be fine, this is what we're going to do. And that's a perfect scenario. Let's bring that scenario into Thanksgiving. A few weeks away. How do you advise, what suggestions do you have for families who may have differing opinions?
Yeah, well, recognizing that in all families there are challenges, and there's often a history of hurt and unresolved pain. And I think, especially in this contentious season, this might be a time to invite people, myself included, to enter with gracious words that we were talking about earlier. Let's salt the conversation with gracious words. And even though there might be things behind that you feel like need addressed, let the gracious words be a prequel to a future reconciliation with those family members.
And remember that this is an election, and that's all it is. It's an election. We will move forward, and ultimately God is in control.
Right. We've been hearing for months that this is the most critical election of our time. And what I know from the Bible is there's nothing new under the sun. We've been here before. We've been there in the past. We'll be there again. And I think there's been no greater demonstration of that when the disciples saw their friend, their teacher, their Savior hanging on a cross, bloodied, thinking, how could this be? This is the ruin of all of our plans and hopes. What they didn't know in those early hours and days was that there was a redemptive work spanning all of history that God was involved in. And that tragedy, that difficulty, that challenge was necessary for redemption. And so what we can today, post-election morning, we know that Jesus is sitting at the right hand of God the Father, ruling with all authority and love. We can rest in that.
Dr. White, thank you for your words of wisdom. We appreciate it.
Glad to be here.
And coming up next on Morning Light, Jeff will talk with radio talk show host Gary Sutton. He will give us his take on this election.
My fellow citizens have made their choice and have selected General Eisenhower and the Republican Party as the instruments of their will for the next 4 years. The people have rendered their verdict, and I gladly accept it. General Eisenhower has been a great leader in war. He has been a vigorous and valiant opponent in the campaign. These qualities will now be dedicated to leading us all through the next 4 years. It is traditionally American to fight hard before an election. It is equally traditional to close ranks as soon as the people have spoken.
Well, he's the host of WSBA Morning News. My friend Gary Sutton has covered presidential races for about the last 2 decades, and he joins me to talk about the election. You just got off the shift. You're off the air. How much sleep did you get last night?
2 hours. Went to bed at 1 o'clock, got up at 3:30.
Well, you look fresh as anything this morning.
Well, I don't know. I think it's a matter of routine, and it's one of those things you have to do. It's part of the job in the morning, as you well know.
So I want to ask you, so you've literally heard hundreds and hundreds of phone calls. You have been in hundreds of conversations. You've interviewed candidates. You have been looking at this every way for hours, every day, for multiple years now. What's changed about the American electorate? What is for good and for bad?
I think we've become very tribal. You've heard that before, that we've kind of gone off into our camps a lot of times, where a conversation is, well, I believe A, well, I believe B, well, what about C? Well, you're an idiot. That's not a conversation. Where we stopped listening to each other, where we became disagreeable when we disagreed, whereas we could actually, I think we used to have common ground, and I think we still do. I think the good news is in the American public right now, most of us talk that way. Most of us can disagree. Most of us can talk back and forth. I have a chance to have the governor on once a month, and the governor and I get on, and the governor always says at the end, he says, could we just talk about basketball the whole time? But we've gotten to a point where we can disagree with each other and yet respect that person to be able to come back, much as we do for a cup of coffee the next day, we can come back for another conversation a month later. So I think that's the good news. And the bad news is that we've gone over a threshold of how we treat each other politically. Everything seems to be okay. We go back and forth at the store every day or shop or whatever, we can have conversations. But when it comes to politics, my gosh, it reminds me of that one commercial used to have where a guy gets behind the wheel and he gets hair growing, he turns into a werewolf. Well, that's right. What we do.
Yeah. So take Governor Shapiro, for example.
Yes.
So you're on a center-right or a conservative radio station, and you bring the governor on. How do you do what you do, which is to listen to someone and see humanity and not to see them as the bill they can sign or whether or not you're going to be on the ticket with Kamala Harris or not?
Right. I think you start by saying, okay, I want to hear what makes him tick. I want to hear what the essence is of what he has to say. Is he just spouting a party line, or does he really have an idea here that maybe I haven't considered yet? I think when you start with that as the premise of your conversation, I think it becomes healthy. And I can walk away at the end saying, you know what, I still disagree with him, but I learned a little something about the point he's coming from here, and now I have something new to consider. And it's kind of what we do on our talk show every day. As I always say, when we get done with our conversation, I want to know something about you I didn't know before, and I want to hear something different that I didn't hear before, and I hope you feel the same way. And if we both come in with that attitude, then there's some common ground we can get to. Now, if you come in and just spout all party lines, I get bored very quickly, as I'm sure he would too.
Sure.
But when we say, I fervently believe this, he's gained my respect, I gain his respect, and I think things work out a little bit better.
You and I have talked often offline about our faith, about how it informs and governs what we do. How has your faith kind of kept you in bounds during this process? If you're getting a reaction inside and say, look, I think I've got to correct that, or I think I've got to give it back as good as they're giving it. How does that act as a regulator for what comes out of your mouth? That's a lot. There's a lot of words you've had to release over the airwaves.
And there's a lot that you don't release. And I think what you do, I think what God allows us to do, is to approach it by looking at the conversation backwards to forwards. I remember Jack Nicklaus. I'm a big golfer, and Jack Nicklaus once said, you play the hole backwards to forwards before you play it, mentally. Well, I think the same can be said for a conversation, where you look and say, well, if I approach the conversation this way, will he really hear me? Or if I approach it another way, will they maybe hear me? Or if I correct somebody, I want to keep the conversation going. So can I correct it in a way that's going to continue to raise it to another level, synthesize it to another level? And I think when we do that, we look at what's the end result going to be. Do we want it just to be, well, I'm going to win and you're going to lose, which is what so many of them turn into now? Or how do we both win in this? And maybe come back and learn more about each other later on.
Gary, you've done your job with class and with dignity and off and on the air. I appreciate your friendship and thank you for helping people through this election season.
Thank you, my friend. Always good seeing you.
Well, thanks to Gary Sutton. You can listen to him on WSBA 910 in the morning if you're in central Pennsylvania. Stay with us. We're back after the break.
Welcome back. Our friend Pastor David Smith helped us wrap up our election coverage yesterday.
Today, he's helping us put election 2024 in a little bit of wide-shot perspective. David?
Psalmist reminds us in Psalm 121, verses 1 through 4, I will lift up my eyes to the hills. From where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, who made the heaven and the earth. He will not let your foot be moved. He who keeps you will not slumber. Behold, he who keeps Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. Brothers and sisters, you, like me, over the past few months have heard the dire warnings that if the wrong person gets into the White House, that our nation is in deep trouble, the fate of our lives are grim. But God is in control, and as we are all aware, Donald Trump is once again the President of the United States of America. Presidents will come, presidents will go, but let us remember, we have an eternal King. The psalmist poses for us a profound question. Where does our true help come from? Does it come from the White House? Does it come from the presidency? The psalmist understands that security and serenity does not lead him to the mountains, but rather the maker of the mountains, the one who fashioned both the heavens and the earth. Our true peace is anchored not in the White House. It's not in those who reside in the White House. Our peace resides in the Lord, the everlasting covenant-keeping King. He reigns over all the created order, even in our own individual lives and our homes this morning. He's ever vigilant in watching and protecting and loving his children. So we needn't worry or be consumed with the fear that is maybe gripping us this morning as we sit and listen to this broadcast. If you have placed your trust in his Son, the Lord Jesus Christ, you're secure in that embrace. He will never let you go. You're one of his sheep. He remains attentive to your needs. He's awake. He understands, and you can rest in his benevolent care. Brothers and sisters, cast aside your worries this morning. Find rest in his abundant grace. Love him supremely and extend that same love to others sacrificially. To him be the glory.
And thank you, Pastor David, for helping us really through this time and putting this election cycle into perspective. And thank you for joining us for this 1 hour special edition of Morning Light.
And remember, especially in a day like today, be sure to check on your neighbors. We'll see you back here tomorrow morning, God willing. And we're going to end the show with my friend organist Brian McGrady playing America the Beautiful.